Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who used to carry his guitar in a gunny sack or sit beneath a tree by the railroad track.
Tim Longo.
Tim Longo, hey.
I'm not getting that one.
No, that's from a little song called Johnny Be Good.
Okay, I do know that song.
Okay, do you know who it's by?
Johnny Be Good. No, I'm not recalling that either.
It's by Marvin Berry's cousin.
Chuck Berry.
Yes,
right.
Who died
okay.
this weekend.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
At 90, yeah. So a little.
Ooh, 90. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I thought he might have already been dead. Good for him.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he lived a long time. Good full life. So, we have him to thank.
Yes, and also that is a good Back to the Future reference as well, right?
Thank you very much. Yes, it was.
Yeah.
It's your cousin, Marvin Berry. Yeah. So that right there is a little bit of a link to the past.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And of course, that is what we're talking about this week. It's the first of our series in Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, which I'm playing in emulation on the Wii via the Virtual Console, and you're playing on one of those 3D handheld.
Yeah, 3DS Virtual Console.
The new 3DS.
Yes, for those who didn't know, I think I maybe already mentioned it, but if you want to play on the 3DS, you have to be playing on a new 3DS because those rascals they require you to have a new 3DS for any of the I don't know if it's any of the Super Nintendo Virtual Console games, but some of the new ones that came out for the 3DS were only available on the new 3DS. So if you have an old 3DS, you can't use it. That was also the case for Super Metroid, which I
gotta figure there's a hardware rev issue there or something where
maybe so.
Maybe they just have a little more CPU these days. That is a weird. Maybe they just like down collect the chip. I have no idea. I have no visibility into handhelds these days.
Anyway, I have other cynical thoughts on why that's the case, but
yeah, it's also possibly the milkening. Yeah. But anyway, so Link to the Past came out in Japan in '91. To give you a sense of 1991, at least as far as the U.S. is concerned, that is the year of Final Fantasy IV, of Civilization, the original, of Another World, which is definitely a title. Yeah. You and I may have to visit one of these days.
Yeah.
Battletoads. Possibly the most difficult game to exist up to that point, and Monkey Island 2. Certainly other games, but those are some highlights I sort of saw picking out. So I just trying to situate it in
gives you headspace,
sort of history, and it's also, I guess, the third Legend of Zelda title. Is that correct?
Link's Awakening. So there were the two on NES, right? There was the original, and then Link's Adventures, which was Zelda 2, and then Link's Awakening was on the Game Boy, and I think that was before this one, but I could be wrong on that. Yeah,
that's sort of a spin-off, maybe.
Yeah, it's not considered one of the core, if that's what you mean. Yeah, this was the third core game, if you will. And I think I was kind of doing a little bit of research.
The list I'm looking at puts this third, and then Link's Awakening fourth.
Okay,
but I could believe that they're very close together. So.
Yeah, they're probably close together. But and when we've only done one other Nintendo game, right, with Super Metroid, and obviously with Breath of the Wild being on everyone's tip of everyone's tongue right now, that it felt like a good time to do Zelda, and it's a classic franchise for sure. And when I don't know, this was the one that came to my mind immediately as far as which one we should play, because it's hard to pick a Zelda game, right? Ocarina of Time comes up as well as sort of like, but I feel like, kind of doing a little bit of research that I did, that it's sort of neck and neck as far as the quote-unquote favorite or best Zelda game of all time. It's this one and Ocarina are the two that kind of and maybe Breath of the Wild will overtake that, but time will tell there. But this one, yeah, Super Nintendo, the first one on the Super Nintendo, so, obviously 16-bit, better graphics than the first one. A lot more refinement, I'd say, as I'm starting to play it. And this is one I never played, personally.
Yeah, no, and I haven't either. And a couple other people who are, kind of interesting. I mean, one thing is that, we just finished playing Soul Reaver, and this is definitely a game that has had an impact on that.
Oh, yeah. Structurally, this thing impacts absolutely. So much.
Yeah, and then, of course, also Hideki Kamiya, who is at Platinum Games now, has made... was the director of Okami, which is a personal favorite of mine. I guess at Clover, I guess that was. Yep. And so he's a well-known name.
That's right. Clover was before Platinum, right?
Right, correct.
Same,
Yeah,
but a lot of
group.
the same
Yep.
people.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. It also had an impact on Fumito Ueda. And of course, Hidetaka Miyazaki, who is the Souls guy. So, this is a game that casts a long, long shadow, and the series as a whole casts a long, long shadow. I mean, there's no getting around any of that. I mean, Legend of Zelda has had more than a dozen titles. It's been around for a long, long time. I mean, really, since the beginning, it's the original Legend of Zelda is a very early NES title. I don't think it was a launch title, but I don't think it was long after. Of course, I never had a console till the PS2, and my first Nintendo console was a Game Boy Color. And then I had a GameCube. So I didn't have a chance to play some of these. So I'm really happy I haven't played this one either. And I'm happy to get a chance to go back. I have played several. I've played Ocarina of Time. I've started Majora's Mask and not finished it. I played Oracle of Seasons. We played some of Four Swords together.
Yeah, we got pretty far in that, I'd say.
Yeah, we did. And I played The Wind Waker, Minish Cap, Twilight Princess, Phantom Hourglass, that was the one I couldn't remember last week, Spirit Tracks.
Oh, you played both of those?
I did, yes. I did not finish Spirit Tracks. I got stuck at some point and couldn't figure it out and put it down and never came back. So that leaves A Link Between Worlds and Breath of the Wild as a couple. Oh, and Skyward Sword that I'd like to play.
Ages? Did you play Ages as well as Season?
No, I gave you Ages as a gift. Oh, hey, I'll buy both of these, and you play this one, and then we'll switch. We'll switch, and how'd that go?
I knew that was going to come up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
no idea where that is. Yeah.
I do know where your Link's Awakening cartridge is. That's here at my house.
Okay, yes.
So at least we've got that nailed down. But yeah, anyway, I mean that's the kind of talk about the sort of long shadow that this thing casts. I mean, this is if you've made an action adventure game, you probably have played a Zelda game.
Yeah. Well, in an action adventure game with an overworld, essentially, right? With a concept of this connective tissue, and I think we'll probably talk about some similar themes as we did with Super Metroid when it comes to structure and ability acquisition and stuff like that. But there definitely are enough differences between the two. Obviously, perspective being the main one, but the way that puzzles play into things. And yeah, it's it's hard to not see an action adventure game of some kind not nod to this original structure of Zelda. They're like, yeah, I mean, you can reference it. I feel like it's at least once a week. I mean, I'm probably wrong on that in my own day-to-day life, but I feel like Zelda comes up at least once a week in day-to-day conversation. In game development, for me at least, and I don't even work exclusively on action adventure games, so I think it's even beyond the genre.
Yeah, I mean, for me, my first encounter with this series would have been Ocarina, although I didn't finish it. I actually only finished it a couple of years ago. I have a GameCube version. When you bought, I guess, Wind Waker for the GameCube. If you pre-ordered it, you got a side disc with four Legend of Zelda games on it. And I've gone back and played Ocarina. I did try to play it on the N64 and just didn't finish it in time. That would have been between Jedi, Starfighter, and a title that didn't ship at LucasArts that I worked on. But yeah, it was, while we were in CERT, I was just like every day sitting down with the N64 playing Ocarina of Time for a good week. It's a weird thing. That's something we can talk about at some point, like the weird rhythm of game development, but maybe not tonight.
One of my great regrets, which I mentioned to Brett offline, is I haven't finished Ocarina. I've started it 3, maybe 4 times, and never got to the end. And you've played probably twice as many as I have when you listed them all out. I played Minish Cap. Oh boy.
Yep, what's going on? It's a rally. It's a rally in the living room.
Should I?
No, it's fine.
Okay. All right. Well, tell me if it... Yeah, tell me.
Part of the personality of the cast.
I guess so.
Cats, dogs, wife, child.
Yeah, you've already heard June tonight. She's been barking outside. Yeah, no.
That's good.
Henry and June are our dogs for the audience's sake. So that's who I'm referencing. Anyway, Minish Cap I really liked. I started Ages, but I didn't finish it, as we've talked about. Ocarina, I don't know what it is. Like 3 or 4 times I started that game over and over again, trying it, and it's released in so many different forms on basically every platform.
Right.
Since it came out, there's been a new version. And I just got this new 3DS XL that I'm actually really enjoying, and I picked up A Link Between Worlds, which so far is really good. And I noticed they have the Ocarina of Time 3D version on there, so I'm like, oh, maybe I'll finally finish it. Yeah, so we'll see how that goes. But
we'll see how that goes. Well, I will say,
Wind Waker. I was just going to say Wind Waker is probably. I did finish Wind Waker, and it's the one I have the fondest memories of for some reason.
Yeah, no, me too. Actually, I was going to say I'm feeling the pull of playing like another one at the same time, just as you are.
Yeah,
and I'm like, do I want to go back and because it wasn't that long ago that I started Majora's Mask and did maybe a quarter of it, and then got distracted. I don't remember what happened, but I was like, oh, I gotta ship Skyrim. I don't know, whatever it was, and so didn't have the energy to finish it, but yeah, I mean, I'm like, oh, maybe I should, pop Skyward Sword into the Wii at the same time and play that along with it. I mean, it's just there's so many parallels between them, but it's also illustrative to think about the differences and how it has evolved over time and the different things they've tried. A Link Between Worlds in particular is one where, maybe it's Skyward Sword, but one of those two, like where you go and you can buy or rent things in advance of being able to like acquire them in dungeons. So there's I
think that's Link Between Worlds.
Okay,
yeah.
So there's more of a like I'm going to pick my tools and I'm going to pay for them.
Yeah.
Kind of approach. Which is very different and distinct from a lot of the games, especially the 2D ones. But even Ocarina, there's always been this sort of like progression. You get this, and then you get this, and you have this inventory screen you're kind of filling out over time. But yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, for me, Wind Waker is the one that I think connected most with me, and I think that's also a game that holds up remarkably because of their artistic choices, which were really decried at the time. Gamers wanted realistic Link, I guess. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's how it's always...
I don't know about you, Tim. I spend like 24 hours a day in reality. And I just... Sometimes I want to spend an hour in non-reality.
Yeah.
Call me crazy. But yeah, I mean, Wind Waker's, cel-shaded style with a kid, as the focus who might be the hero of time, etc. Anyway.
Yeah,
it's something that appeals to me, and it's a lot of it is in part because of how just goddamn beautiful that game is.
It really is, yeah. The style, I'm a sucker for stylization. I think that's why Okami had a big impact on me too. I actually don't know if I finished Okami because that game is long.
Not only did I finish, I got all of the 100 pearls. So.
Oh man, yeah, I definitely didn't do that. But
yeah, I put in the hours on that game.
Yeah,
and I would do it again.
Yeah, totally.
It was gorgeous. Oh, it's a gorgeous game. Anyway, I think we've kind of set the stage for what it's shadow and things, but let's talk a little bit about what it is. So it's an action adventure. We've talked about that, but it's been in 2D and 3D forms. Of course, this one is a 2D version. The big thing about it, and we touched on this a little bit in our Super Metroid series, is the structure. Where you can wander about this overworld. In some cases, you're gated, where you can't progress into an area because you don't have some ability yet. And so you end up getting pulled back kind of into the main story and the main path just in order to sort of go into dungeons, get an ability that you can use, which is normally in the form of an item, an inventory item that you can equip, and then use that to both to defeat the boss, but then to open up more of the world to you. A little bit like Super Metroid, but usually kind of in a more story-directed way. Rather than a purely exploratory way.
Right, and I think structurally, I mean, I guess if you were to map them out, it may not be the case, but I feel like structurally, the overworld allows a maybe more cyclical flow to the way that the macro level design was laid out versus Metroid. Because it's 2D, you often have to retraverse areas, from a platforming perspective and a combat perspective to get back to an area that you were before. Even though do you know what I mean by that? Like there's ways.
Well, I mean, I would ask you explain how Zelda's different.
Well, because the overworld itself is not a platforming based world, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
When I retraverse areas in the overworld, it's more of an analog space, right? So I can actually avoid enemies. I can go left or right in certain areas. Like it's not open world per se, but I would say it's the genesis of open world, regardless of the gating. And the other thing to add to your point about how it gates areas is that there's always, like in Super Metroid, which these are the same concepts. There's fairly clear telegraphing. You'll see a crack in a wall, or you'll see a really large boulder or something, and you'll think, well, I can't do something with that now. Maybe later I can. And that will play into later, which we'll probably get into, is just the way that they roll out and teach you things, which Metroid did a good job of as well. Does that make sense as far as my overworld differentiation?
Right, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think in Super Metroid as well, you always have the opportunity to avoid enemies, but there aren't often a lot of paths, and until maybe in the very late game where you've really opened up so much of the map.
There's shortcuts here and there, yeah.
Yeah, sure, but you are right. I mean, in playing Link to the Past this time, I found myself, and we'll talk about why I kept ending up there, but I'd go from the village, and I'd be trying to make my way. I'd go north, or either a northern or a southern or high route or low route, I guess you could say, to get to where I was trying to get to, which was this sage who was over in this enclosed area on the eastern side of the map. And there were basically two ways I would look at the map and go, oh, I could go this way, I could go that way.
Yeah, the map is kind of misleads you sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, there's that too. The map is not purely... It's not always clear what you can traverse and what you can't, or how things connect. I actually, and we can talk about this later, but I spent a fair amount of time pretty lost as far as how to get into the second dungeon, really. There's the first dungeon that we talked about. This was the Eastern Palace. Like, I had a hard time finding that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I blame the map, actually, because one of the things I didn't expect from this game, and I guess we'll get right into this, is that when you talk to people, they'll just say, oh, you need to go to this place, and they'll put an X on your map. Mm-hmm. And I'll be like, oh, man, like, that's not, like, I don't think of Zelda as doing that.
I don't think Zelda 1 did that, I don't believe, the first one.
Well, and I guess I guess sometimes that would happen in Wind Waker, for example, like, to find
God, I don't even remember.
Treasures on the bottom of the ocean and things like that. I mean, there were indications of where things were, but I don't remember like such a clear, like they literally put a flashing icon of like, this is where you're going to find this pendant. This key quest item is going to be here, and it's blinking on the map when you go to the map. And I was just surprised. I was just totally surprised. Like that is, on the one hand, it's way more direction than I actually expect from Zelda. Yeah, I mean, certainly the 2D Zeldas I played on the DS or the Game Boy Advance or whatever, like Minish Cap and Spirit Tracks and the Phantom Hourglass, even the Oracle game, like, I had no idea often where to go. Mm-hmm. There was no clear direction of any kind.
And that's often been my frustration, and usually when I put a Zelda game down is when I don't know where to go, and I forget what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah, forgetting is a big problem.
There's no quest logs typically and things like that. Well, not only that, to jump ahead though, once you come out of that palace and you have the first pendant, did you look at the map after that?
I did not. No.
So, next time you start playing, just pop the map up. It shows you where the rest of the pendants are. And
no, I've seen that, and the Master Sword.
In the Master Sword, yeah. So it's like they're just right there. So it gives you the things to reach out for, the goals. But now it's about obviously getting through those gates to get to them,
right?
Which I was also surprised by. Yeah,
I was also surprised by. So because I was a little lost, one of the things that's always been the case in Zelda games that I've played is that there's a fortune teller character. And the role of the fortune teller is to take some of your money and tell you what you're supposed to be doing. Right? And that's a good usability thing. It's like, well, if you get stuck, go to this place and spend some whatever, rupees in this case, and the person will tell you this is what you're supposed to be doing. But one of the things I've already found with Link to the Past is it just keeps advancing those. So like the first,
each time you go,
it's just like, oh, this is the next thing you're supposed to do, and not like this is what you're supposed to be doing right now.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's weird.
So I actually spent a lot of time. Like I went and talked to the sage, and we should probably give some story context in a minute. But just to give you like a sense, it's like, oh, I went and talked to this guy, and then I was like, I don't know what to do. I couldn't find how to get into the Eastern Palace. So I went back to the fortune teller, and the fortune teller said, oh, well, you need to go to the desert. I was like, oh, okay. And I went down to the desert. I did some stuff there. But I couldn't go very far. And I had kind of worked out what I needed to do next. And I spoke to somebody down there. They told me what I would have to do. And I went back to the fortune teller. And the fortune teller said, well, you need to get this book and bring it and be able to read this thing. And I'm like, how am I going to do that? And I went into the place. I had seen the book. I knew where it was. And I could not figure out how to get it.
Yeah, I think
it intentionally, I mean, it misled me. Because it just kept advancing the script. Like, do this, and then you're going to need to do this, and after that, do this, and then you're going to have to do that. And I hadn't gone to Eastern Palace.
You had not done a thing that he had asked you to do.
Correct.
And then gone back to him, and then he said to do the next thing.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
the fortune teller did. Yeah, I was really surprised. It was a real usability problem, so I was really stuck. And then I'm like, I've missed something, because I know I was supposed to do this other thing. I clearly can't get to this book, so let me go do that. I'll just, I need to figure out where that thing is. And I went and dug around more, in the area where the first sage was, and I figured it out. Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the beginning of this game, because we kind of haven't, and I've dived right into sort of like a problem that I had, but I think we should set a little bit more context.
Well, I think an important part of starting from the beginning of this game is to talk about the series in general, and how it deals with story and quote unquote the legend and Link's role and Which, I don't know, because I've only played Final Fantasy IX, I don't know if we can kind of occasionally loop back into that series, because I'm interested to hear your thoughts about any correlations between the two, because there's, I think there's 17 Zelda games now or something like that, all told, and this concept of this legend that is retold time and time again, and often in the beginning of this game, Link wakes up in his house, and basically, let's see, I'm kind of, I shouldn't play Link Between Worlds at the same time, because I'm going to mix them up. But Zelda, I forget who tells him, but that Zelda is in the dungeon of the castle.
It's basically a dream sequence.
It's a dream. Okay, yeah.
And he and then he also gets that it's sort of the only time so far that it gets reinforced. At the beginning of the game, that Zelda is like calling out to you in some way, like telepathically,
and that she is in a specific place, which is in the dungeon of the castle.
And then you can go through the garden. Yeah,
you can't do anything until you do that, and Zelda's role in these games is different, to some degree every time, and they've tried to make that more different as the games have gone on. But there is this constant theme, and taking the legend or myth of these games, to sort of a cerebral direction. There's this myth that they're retelling time and time again with slightly different context every time, but there is this sense that sort of that Link is this every hero that is constantly kind of doing the same thing over and over again in a way. And Zelda's always plays a role, and sometimes it's a surprise who she ends up being or what have you. But he wakes up, and the dream sequence, and then she's in the dungeon, and this wizard, I don't know if he's a wizard, if they call him a wizard, but and I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name. I didn't write his name down.
Aghanim.
Aghanim, yes. He has he wants to break a seal, right?
Yes.
That the seven mystics,
seven wise men
from a long time ago had sealed up because he wants to reign supreme, I guess. I forget his motivations exactly. And you are supposed to stop him, but why do you need to go get Zelda to do that? I don't remember that part.
Well, because she's calling out to you,
and that's all we know. And
we need to save her, because I think implicitly she's a descendant of one of the seven wise men.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because the guy,
he's basically destroying these. Yeah, Aghanim is basically destroying these descendants.
Yeah, and they have actually a scene, a pretty gruesome scene of sacrifice.
Yeah,
that one of the descendants,
father, I think. Yeah,
maybe, or I thought it was one of the other descendants. Like you witnessed the second to last descendant on that pedestal, kind of, I guess, gets sacrificed. Pretty rough.
And disappearing,
I was surprised, and so you need to stop that from happening. And one of the cool things about the intro that I don't think they all blur together, so I'm trying to remember the first Zelda, but the first dungeon and the way that they onboard you into the game is the castle, and it's in the dungeon format. So you learn pretty early on some pretty good, how dungeons work and how the lock and key mechanisms of future dungeons will work in the first quote unquote dungeon, even though it's not a dungeon. It's just the castle itself.
It's the castle. Well, I mean, and before that, even you start out, you have this dream where, I don't know, maybe you're seeing the events that have happened, and then you're hearing Zelda's call to you, and then you sort of acquire a lamp, which you're going to need, although you can walk right out without it and have to come back. I didn't do that, but you could. I tested to see if you could.
It's kind of a Zelda-ism, right?
Yeah, sure. You need to pick up these things. And then, but at the beginning, your only skill is that you can pick up stuff and throw it. Because you have no inventory other than this lamp, and you don't have this magic power that comes later. So you really have nothing. You have pick up and throw, and in the sort of starting room, I mean, one of the things about, Zelda as a series, and, Ocarina is certainly this way, and Wind Waker is certainly this way, and Twilight Princess is this. I mean, they're all this way, is that you start in initial environments, which are fairly non-threatening, and let you demonstrate that you understand a single skill, although you can skip it. So it's not like you're forced to understand it. But in that first room, you can run around and you can pick up the little pots, the little clay pots, and pick those up and throw them and get hearts underneath that are useless because you're at full health. But that's basically all you have. I can pick up things, I can throw things, and you've had a father figure character say to you, "Oh, I'm going to work. Stay in the house," which I think is great, because it's like if you listen to that, you'd be waiting a long time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a good thing. It's like it's asking it's telling the player, I don't know, don't accept authority. I don't know what it's telling the player. There's a real question there for me of like, what is that moment trying to say? Like, I it's the sort of thing that feels like it would be an achievement or something these days. Like the first thing you do is go outside, and that would be Teenage Rebellion achievement, ka-ching, or whatever.
They'd acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a little rebellious moment. They know what the player's going to do, and
exactly. Well, and it is. It's a little conversation between designer and player, and then you make your way to the castle. You can walk right around the guards, basically to a side entrance, and make your way through a garden, and get into the first dungeon. Like you said, it's sort of a tutorial dungeon. Like, here's what you can expect. While you're going in, you run into your dad, maybe. It's not really clear.
You think so?
It's the person you were living with. He gives you the sword and shield, and he seems to want to tell you something more. But of course, you're in a hurry, and you really don't get anything more. It's sort of like, oh, here, take this. It's dangerous to go alone. And, oh, hey, by the way, and it's like, and you continue on. There's a moment where he's like, oh, you should know. And
yeah, that's right. Yeah. There's
no more stuff. It's like, hey, you should totally know this thing. And I feel like he's going to say, you're one of the seven, or, whatever.
You're a descendant.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's highly suggesting that sort of stuff, or who knows? Who knows what it's supposed to be? So you go in and you basically get to rescue the princess right off, which is a Nintendo thing,
Yeah, I was just going to say that another possible thing that he might talk about is Link tends to be the quote unquote chosen one, or spoken about as the savior figure in this myth, and he always starts off as basically a little boy or a young man, right? And
right, it's a hero's journey.
Yeah, it's literal distillation.
It's about as literal as you can be. Yeah. So you go and do that, and ultimately you do find her, and you meet a few different enemies, and part of what you learn about combat at this point is that sometimes it's avoidable and sometimes it's not, because there is what we used to call blood locking, which means you have to kill these enemies to unlock the doors. And it's very literal. Like, the doors slam down, there are two enemies, you kill them, the doors open. And then you also learn about how the combat works, in that you need to hit the characters where their swords aren't, and things like that.
Yeah, sometimes their shields even.
Or shields, right. It's a timing thing. There's the final type of guard that you run into the castle actually has this huge, I guess you'd say, flail. Is that a flail, I guess? Or a morning star, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
I guess a flail. Anyway, but a ball and chain that you have to, you can avoid, and I think you have the boomerang at that point so you can stun him, and so you're sort of learning building blocks of rules, and like you need this kind of key to open these kinds of doors.
Yeah. I think you get a map as well, right? Like they start
and you get a map as well. That's correct. Yeah.
Each piece of a dungeon that you'll want to try to get. I don't think they give you a compass in that one though. But...
They do not. No, the compass comes later.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things that were surprising to me here. You end up escaping through the sewers, so you know it's a video game at that point.
Which I did make note of, and I'm wondering, was it the first?
Oh, I doubt it. By 91, there have to have been other sewers.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
It seems unlikely, but still, it's a sewer in a video game. And there were some interesting choices. I actually died in the castle.
Yeah, I think I did too. Yeah, I was sloppy with my combat.
Yeah, if you die, you go back to the beginning of a dungeon, but you keep the stuff that you found along the way, and a lot of the state has been preserved. So doors that you've opened, you still have opened, things like that. So you don't have to redo the whole dungeon in a sort of functional sense, but you might have to retraverse a lot of it. So it's kind of a weird choice. It's an interesting choice. I think probably we'll come back to that at some point because I'm not sure how I feel about it now. Anyway,
was it a save state limitation of the cart days from the original? Do you think that's why they had to do it that way?
Well,
I mean, it's essentially a checkpoint.
I can't see how. I mean, the reason is they preserve all this other state in the dungeon.
Yeah, but if you leave the room and come back in, the room state will reset, right?
Yes.
Including the enemies will respawn.
But I guess what I'm saying is there's not a lot of extra data to preserve to say that player was at this cell location.
Yeah.
They were in this tile
versus starting in the beginning of the dungeon.
At the very beginning.
It's a balancing thing too, right? If they just started you in the previous room, then you're definitely going to get through things more quickly and easily.
Sure.
Right?
There's definitely a sense of like
pacing.
Am I getting my money's worth? And am I good enough to get through this dungeon? And that's a difficulty curve issue. Like, is the player good enough? Like, I'm going to give them something harder to do, the next dungeon. So they need to be good enough to get through this one. So I'm kind of training the player. I mean, there's an element of player skill here. As I mentioned with the combat, there's sort of like positioning yourself well against.
Yeah, it's an interesting skill, skill-based combat because it's pretty inaccurate, I guess I'd say, or something, where it's kind of semi-analog in that way, and the AI is pretty unpredictable. Unlike, I'd say maybe unlike, say, Metroid, where I feel like the patterns with the AI enemies tend to be a little more understandable. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And
they're definitely super predictable in Super Metroid. I feel like they're pretty predictable here. Especially sort of the larger, like, humanoid, the guards and the whatever. The ones that are not are like the skulls that have the blades on them and things like that, where I'm not always sure what they're going to do, or there's like worms that come out of the floor. Anyway. Yeah. But one of the things I wasn't expecting is that there's sort of light simulation elements here. At some point during the castle, you get this magic power that you can light stuff on fire. And that means you can light the braziers on fire in the sewers, and it lights up the area you're in. But that goes out after a certain period of time, which is not really deeply simulationist, but it is enough of like, I lit this thing, and then eventually the fire went out. Mm-hmm. So there's at least sort of like, I don't know, there's this tension of like, I want to do things quickly because I know my light is not going to last. And then I'm going to have to switch back to the lantern, so I won't be able to use the boomerang because you can only use one inventory item at a time. There's like this tension, this push me, pull you of that stuff, which I didn't expect to find actually in this.
Yeah, it's a little more depth than. Yeah, I mean, Zelda 1 had really none of that kind of thing, right? I mean, I feel like it it's a big jump to the 16-bit realm to do, even when you don't have anything lit up, just a little cone of light that you have around you is interesting, right? It changes the room dynamics.
Absolutely, yeah, and I see a lot more of that in the sort of second dungeon. Anyway, you go, because I'm like, I don't have a lot more notes to say, and I spent a lot of time in the castle.
Well,
then being lost.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to mention about the castle, and we'll get to this with the Eastern Palace. Is that what the first dungeon is called? The other thing they introduce in this Zelda, which I really I didn't know that they introduced in here until we started playing this one, is the multi-leveled 2-layer, kind of 2-floor level design of it, which is quite cool. And there's times
on any one screen. And we kind of haven't talked about this, but the sort of way Zelda works is kind of at a 2 level of tile, which is like each screen is a tile, more or less. Outdoors, that's a little bit fudged. But especially in a dungeon, each room is basically a full screen tile, then made up of individual, 16 by 16 or 32 by 32 pixel tiles, something like that, which are individually tiled for asset reuse, for 2D asset reuse. But what you're talking about is this ability, like within one room, to move up and down a level, sort of a height. Yeah.
Right, and I'm forgetting exactly if Zelda 1 had the, essentially moving up a level via a ladder or something on the same screen. But what they do in this one is you're moving underneath catwalks that are above you.
Yeah, stuff's hidden.
So Link is moving underneath a second level, and they actually have some pretty interesting little basically level design flows, right? Where you will go, you'll be either on a catwalk or under a catwalk in one room, and you'll kind of move under it, and you'll see above that there's a chest above you or something, but you can't get there in this room, and you have to go out to another room and then go up some stairs somewhere else and then come through a door. So just another, literally layer of level design that was not present before that I would think at the time, playing this in the era that we're talking about, would be pretty cool notion in an action adventure like this, so.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I found myself using the fact that you could jump down.
And then you can jump down.
As a way to avoid stuff.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So that was definitely
guards. Yeah.
A new layer there that was pretty cool. So you essentially, they're introducing you slowly to different enemy types, and some of them are more passive and some of them are more aggressive, and you rescue Zelda. And then I don't remember the scene that happens right after that, though. You're usually better memory at the story side of things.
You end up making your way out to a sanctuary where there's some kind of sage.
Oh, yeah, it's like a church kind of,
Right.
Yeah,
it's basically a church. Yeah. Where some old dude is like, oh, okay, I'll take care of her, but I need you to go and find the Master Sword, because that's what will allow you to defeat the wizard, Aghanim, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
He basically gives you the main quest. Go out, find do whatever needs to be done to get this thing, that lets you...
He says it's in a forest.
Kill people with impure, desires or whatever. I mean, the impure ambitions. So go out and kill the evildoers with this sword, but you got to get to it. So he gives you sort of the big through line of the game.
Yeah, and he starts, and he says a little bit more about the 7 wise men, right? And that the main villain is eliminating the
descendants, right? So he can break the seal.
He can break the seal, and I don't know if you found it, but I think you can actually go to the seal in the upper part of the castle. I was exploring around. Did you see that thing?
I don't think I did, but I believe that
there's like electrical. Yeah, and that's another interesting thing.
I'm not surprised. I feel like we're going to end up there at some point. So.
Yeah, I think that's another interesting thing about the Zelda games that bring in a little bit of that pseudo open world feel, is that I stopped myself at one point, and I actually probably will do more of this in between our episodes, but once you do get a new mechanic, or really at any time, you can do a lot of extra exploring all through the overworld. And occasionally you'll be able to go places that you don't really necessarily need to be there when you find them, but they let you go and experience this thing. And at the very least, it might give you a clue that you'll be coming back here for some reason once you get something. But at the top of the castle, one of the upper catwalks outside, there's actually this big fancy door, and there's this electrical current that is going from one sort of Tesla coil looking bulb, ball to the other, and it's kind of gating the door. And so I kind of just assumed that was the seal that he's trying to break. And then the other thing that you learn, I think, around this area is that the guards are not acting normally, like
right.
The wizard has taken over their minds or something, right? So they're not really. They're not necessarily evil. They've been. He's basically taken over the minds of them, and so and then from the sanctuary. Do they tell you to go back to the village before they tell you to go to? I think so, right? They tell you to go talk to the elder.
They tell you to go talk to this elder who should be in this village. Yeah. But when you go to the village, what you immediately find out when you come across the first house, which is a good bit of level design. Well, second house really. First house in the village. The first house that you come across is the fortune teller.
Oh, yeah, right.
And you can go in, and the fortune teller will take your money, which for me was basically all the money I had at that point, and say, oh, you need to go talk to the elder. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
I knew that. Yeah. So I left with my 1 rupee and went into the village, and the first house there you encounter, is the elder's house, but his wife is home, and she says, oh, he's not here. Maybe somebody knows where he is. So you get this kind of you're going to have to interact more with the world to learn stuff. And like you said, you have the opportunity at this point really to do a lot of stuff kind of in the overworld or in Kakariko Village or...
and go kind of wherever you want to within...
Really, as long as you can get a place, you can do stuff. And I did. I mean, I spent a lot of time. I got a couple of pieces of heart, maybe. I got the bombs.
Yeah. I got 1, maybe. Another quick note before I forget. I made a note about the bombs. In Zelda 1, and I believe in Link's Awakening and probably Adventures of Link, I believe bombs are usually an ability, right?
Right. They are an ocarina, I think.
Yeah.
The Gorons.
And they became a little bit more so that, but I thought it was interesting in this one that they're actually you can get them random. You can buy them, but also I've gotten them from bushes and things like that.
Yeah, you can find them by
and so that's a little bit of a nod to some of the stuff that people are talking about with Breath of the Wild and I think with Link Between Worlds is this concept that there's essentially resources that unlock some of these doors, quote unquote doors, right? And that you can acquire them via the open kind of the overworld. And I was just happily delighted to see that I'm just used to bombs being more of a lock and key mechanism. But now when I see I haven't tried it yet, but when I see a broken, a cracked wall, I'll use one of these bombs to see if it does something.
I do it all over the place. In fact, I tried to go back to the sewers.
There's some there, yeah.
Because I had seen them there, but you can't get back to them.
Oh, really? Son of a...
So maybe at some point we will be able to, but you can't. Neither from going through the castle.
Or you went up to the top of the...
Or going in through the sanctuary. Because... you go through the throne room.
Yeah. To get to the mountainous area, right? You end up coming out through the mountains,
right.
Above where the sanctuary is. Yeah, which incidentally, the Link Between Worlds overland map looks almost identical to this one, as a side.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I'd like to look at all the maps. Well, I sort of feel like we've talked about a lot of stuff already. You want to take a quick break?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll talk about some other stuff when we come back. Welcome back from the break. Let's try to talk quickly about the East Palace because I want to, or the Eastern Palace rather, because I want to get to a few pieces of feedback, and one of them actually has a question for us. So, basically, for me, it involved thinking I needed to talk to this guy and then getting lost a fair amount, which I don't think was the intention. But well, we already talked about that.
Oh yeah. You mean on your way there? Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
the maps, and I think this is a common Zelda problem for this era, is that the maps tend to be suggestive as far as like where things are located in the paths to get to them, but the actual paths are something you have to really figure out, and a bit puzzly and circuitous. So yeah, I mean, I could imagine. I think I maybe got lucky and kind of meandered my way there and got it pretty quickly. But yeah, once you get in, I think...
but as a result, I probably spent a lot of time covering the map that you didn't. Like, I talked to somebody who said, oh, you should talk to these people beyond the waterfall. They'll teach you how to swim. And I got a mushroom and gave it to this witch, and she put it in her pot, and I got a special ability. I mean, I just like...
Oh, wow, yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I mean, there was stuff you could do on the overworld that can be done, out of order.
Which is that's again one of the tropes of this game, and I think a lot of games have been influenced by, and it's a cool aspect. I picked up a random bush at one point and found a hole and fell into the hole, and it was a fairy, grotto where you get your
all your health back.
Zeldaism, you get all your hearts back and stuff, even though I didn't need to, but. And as a side note, there was echo in the audio inside that little grotto cave, which was a nice touch for this era of console game. And it's just those little surprises, right? And as you start getting more and more of these abilities, you're going to obviously, like Metroid, open up a lot more options for yourself in the exploration side of it. And this game, even though the structure on 2D, as far as like on paper, if you were to flowchart your way through this, there are a lot of similarities to Super Metroid. The sense of exploration in the Zelda game is the best, I think, Nintendo does when it comes to just feeling that sense of the overworld.
Right. Well, it's an adventure for sure, in that you don't know what's coming next.
Yeah, and you feel the sense of discovery, right, where you're actually going to unearth something. Yeah, that surprises you. Like, I didn't find that mushroom thing that you're talking about. I did talk to the people about the waterfall, and there's this sort of implied, and it's one of my frustrations with the series too, is lack of some sort of quest log. But as you're talking to people randomly, you are kind of indirectly picking up these side quests. You're not able to keep track of them via the game, but they are telling you things that you could go and do at some point. And my problem is I usually forget.
Right. Yeah, and that for me too. I mean, I picked one up because I went to the desert because the fortune teller told me that's where I had to go. Yeah, I picked up a random thing there that I'm like, oh, I can't wait to come back here. Once I realized I was not on the right track rather. I'm like, oh, I can't wait to come back and figure out what the deal is with this little side thing that I figured out. So
I guess you just need to take notes or something.
Yeah, for sure.
So in this, just to quickly go over, because we want to keep things moving, but for these palace, I feel like they use the multi-level thing quite well in this dungeon as well. Kind of routes were really looping back around within each other, and if the castle hadn't been sort of like you said, the tutorial dungeon, this one is pretty simple overall. I kind of got stuck in a couple places that, as far as like trying to find the big key for the last door to unlock the boss door, etc. Kind of got turned around, but I thought it was interesting the way that they kind of laid the level out and used the multi-level thing and introduced you to that quite well. And like you said earlier, light was a pretty critical element in a couple rooms, which I also really appreciated. But pretty basic overall, other than kind of getting stuck in a couple places. Definitely difficult from a combat perspective. They have a lot of different enemy types, which I was appreciative of as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing that really frustrated me was that it seemed to suggest that you needed to get the special item from in here to be able to fight people in armor.
Yep, totally.
That is not true.
It's not true, and then when you hit those guys with armor, the feedback you get is the same as when you hit an enemy, any other enemy. They flash in the same way.
Exactly.
And you get the same really,
yeah, a little bit weak there because I thought I needed to have what ended up being the bow, which I didn't expect. But I didn't actually need that. I needed to just, whack these guys with swords or throw pots at them. Turns out, those guys who kind of open their eyes and hop at you who are green, if you just throw a pot at them, it's one hit while their eyes open.
You can hit them with your sword, too.
Yeah, and you can hit them with a sword, and it takes many more times or whatever. But, and then you get the arrow, and it's even better. But
yeah. But there's a bloodlock room where you have to kill those guys, right? That's where I got stuck.
That's where I got stuck. You
have to kill two of them, and you're like, well, I didn't think I could kill these guys.
Did you find the fairy room in there?
Oh, are you serious? No.
Not in that room, but in this dungeon, there's a fairy room which will replenish your health, which I thought was very clever, and I'm just going to leave it there. I'm not going to tell you how.
Sure. Oh, shoot. Okay, now I'm going to have to go back.
So that actually helped. I mean, that made it a lot easier to get through the dungeon because I could go back and, go to the fairy room, replenish my health for basically the second half of the dungeon. Yeah.
Interesting.
Good. It's very clever. And it's very... There are visual cues. I mean, I will say I figured it out because of the visual cues. I should be able to do this. Oh my God, what is that? Oh, that's what that means, and so there's a visual language that kind of all in a few little steps, works itself out.
Okay, all right.
Which is very good.
And a pro tip for anybody playing on a new 3DS, which I think I already mentioned I ended up buying one so I could play this game, but which I'm really enjoying it. But the 3DS has, for Virtual Console, has a state saving feature. So I do feel like I'm cheating a little bit, but I can basically save the state of the game anywhere. So it's helping me get through the dungeons because I can basically save the state outside of a room if I want to, and restore that state, reload that state essentially. So it's kind of a save anywhere.
Whereas I'm playing it for real.
Yeah, you're playing it for real, but I'm not going to play for real. I'm going to use this feature that Nintendo has given me. So yes, we'll compare. I don't feel like they gave it to me. I don't feel like I'm cheating. I do feel like I'm cheating, but
yeah, you're cheating, but that's okay. You cheat. You cheat with your ROM hack. All right, let's put a pin in it there and talk about for next time. We kind of looked ahead at walkthroughs without kind of looking at the details, but it seems like the next thing we want to do is play through Aghanim, who's the big boss. So that's kind of surprising. It feels like, we're going to fight this guy that fast. Sounds like maybe we are. So we're going to play up through that point. I mean, one of the things I'm worried about is when we look at these, when we look at walkthroughs, sometimes it's is this just some optimized thing? Is this how you would actually play?
It's hard to judge, yeah.
It really is. And this is
without spoiling stuff.
Exactly.
And I'm intentionally playing Link Between Worlds at the same time as this one, and that one is sort of a spiritual sequel to that one, and I'm already seeing crossovers and correlations. There's a sanctuary, the castle, a lot of cool similarities, which I'm enjoying, but I'm wondering if I'm going to really mess myself up somehow by playing these in tandem.
And we should probably deep dive into sort of the echoes in the series in the future, because there's a ton of them from game to game.
And we're going to miss a bunch of them. People will probably write in about that. Yeah.
Oh, and that's fine. They will be able to write in to devgameclub@gmail.com.
Very good.
As Michael Keane did. So I'm going to dive right into a little bit of feedback we had. He says, "Hey, gentlemen." That's a stretch. When you guys do episodes, you transition between discussing different forms of development. Games writing in terms of the story is very different from level design, at least writing on a macro level. I'm not saying they never become intertwined. It's usually awesome when they do. Anyway, character art is different from music. Puzzle creation is not the same as developing satisfying combat. But you guys speak on all of them with competence and experience. Well, I do. You make it seem like you're comfortable with all kinds of development. I suppose my question is twofold. Which areas have each of you worked on directly? I just searched for Brett and came up with, quote, programming, but what does that mean in real terms? And how frequently are devs working on multiple parts of a game? In other words, how static are job titles? If someone's a programmer, how often is that guy also called on to create art assets or brainstorm on writing a character's motivation? I would think that back 15 to 20 years ago, with much smaller teams, the need for jack-of-all-trades types was much more necessary, while today people are getting more and more specialized. Writers are writers and artists are artists. If true, is this good, bad, or both? Thanks. And then he goes on to say he might download a ROM or buy a Wii or whatever to try to play this with this thing. So that's from Keane, Michael Keane.
Whew.
It's a big question, right?
Yeah, we could go a whole episode on this, I think. Yeah, I mean, do you want to start, or how do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, my own history, as a human, is that I'm a deep reader. I like to write. I picked up programming at a young age. I mean, I was like 8 or 9 when I first programmed. And I've always been a generalist kind of programmer. So I've programmed on any given game. I could program really any part of it. Probably, some areas are more specialized, especially networking or graphics. But generally speaking, I've been a gameplay programmer and a real generalist. So when you say you search for Brett and it comes up with programming, well, that's kind of accurate for me. But I have worked with people who only write graphics code, and maybe I don't know that I've worked with a lot of people who only write shaders, but it's that specialized that you can have people who only do things like that at that level these days. But I'll also say, on Starfighter, I contributed quite a lot to the initial story, along with Wayne Cline, who was our first production manager. We basically came up with the story for Starfighter, and a lot of the game came out of the sort of our ideas of what a Star Wars story should include. 3 characters and all that stuff. And one of them was a pirate, and we kind of came up with this whole thing. So what I would say is, and this, the further you go back, the more this is true, people used to have to do everything or more of a thing. You look at the first Ultima game, and I'd be surprised if more than Garriott worked on it. Maybe he got a little help. But back when I first started programming in the very early 80s, and even a little bit before, I did writing, and I would actually take a piece of graph paper and make, draw sprites out of 16 by 16 or 8 by 10 or whatever, depending on what kind of programming environment I was using. I would literally draw, with a pencil to figure out how to make a thing look like it was running around in an environment. That has changed a lot today. Tim?
I mean, I think definitely echoing what Brett was saying there, the latter part of what he was saying there, as far as like the old days and how it was necessary to have generalists kind of, and people were covering multiple different areas. First, another part of my answer that comes to mind as Brett was talking that I'll say there is a sense of, I think for both of us, we've been in the industry and working on games long enough to where you know how many, I'm over 20 years, you're around there too, right?
Yeah, I'm 19 this year, yeah almost 20.
So we've ended up interacting with a lot of different disciplines and a lot of different people in those disciplines over quite a few games at this point, and you're gonna form opinions and gain expertise, at least from a third sort of person perspective, on pretty much every aspect of development by now. And some of that is just raw experience and just, and I don't think either of us would say that we're right on a lot of what we say. It's just our opinion about how something is done or should be done or has been done. And I think a lot of that just comes with those years of experience. I think it is. We also, like Brett said, both kind of grew up in an era where there were much smaller teams, and so you did have to know the business of most of the team most of the time. And I think that was a cool, fun time to be doing that. And I'm now working on teams that are, 300, sometimes larger, and so we end up having to have specialists. And he asked about, whether that's good or bad. I think it's both. It definitely is. I think a lot of people miss those days when people can be more generalists. But I work with some amazing people, specialists who are just mind-blowing every day because they are so good at that thing that they do. Right. But unfortunately, they don't have the same perspective on the rest of the project that other people do, because they only think and worry about their thing. And so they obviously are curious about what else is going on the project. Now, for me specifically, I came up through design. My background is in theater directing, so it's even weirder than that. And I don't have a CS, background at all. Math is definitely not my strong suit, as Brett is happy to remind me of often. But I came up through design, level design specifically, so that's why I speak so much probably about level design in these. But also going into system design, lead design, creative director, it has become my job to kind of know everyone's business in a way, at least to some degree. So I don't know if that allows me to speak broadly about a bunch of different topics, but I do these days have to have an opinion about animation. I have to have an opinion about art. I'm not an artist, but I have to direct, I have to work with our art director to come to a conclusion of as, good of a product as we can. And so I guess I've just sort of had to feel, I've had to develop an opinion about a wide range of things. And so I guess I feel like I can speak about these things, even though I think many of them I'm probably not technically qualified for.
Well, and one of the things I think probably for both of us, and maybe less for you, but one of the things that we're less prone to know about these days is the direct business concerns. I can remember back on Starfighter with Daron Stinnett talking about this is what the unit cost is, and this is how much this is how many dollars they're going to spend on marketing and how they're going to spend it, and it costs this much to have a commercial on TV or whatever, and what that means in terms of units, and it's different for PC versus a PlayStation, for example, licensing costs and cost of goods. And I still feel like I have a general sense of all that sort of businessy stuff, but it's never forefront in my mind anymore. And of course the market has changed dramatically. But I mean, literally, 15, 20 years ago, you could know about all that stuff. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I probably know more about that stuff these days than I'd like to be honest, but in my position. But
yeah, you probably have to. I mean, nobody's going to want to learn that Master Chief's a girl.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, God. Sorry.
Metroid reference there, but...
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that comes to mind on the fly here that I'd like to add in, too, is that I think... both Brett and I, because we've worked together before, and I think one of the reasons we probably thought it would be an interesting idea to do this podcast is we both are pretty collaborative developers in general. I've always, and I'm not trying to toot his horn here, and the last thing I want to do, in fact, but I've always considered Brett to be a programmer who has a design mind, and I often really appreciate programmers who can think outside of just the math of things and think about things just as a game developer rather than just a programmer. And I think it's valuable for especially design leaders to look for ideas and input and across the team, no matter what your discipline is. So I think it's really the specialization of the industry, I think, is going to and has caused some challenges for us across these last, say, 10 years, where you kind of some of that collaboration is missing. And so we're always trying different team dynamics to figure out better ways to make sure you're getting inputs from different disciplines, because it doesn't necessarily just it shouldn't just come from designers.
Yeah, no, and for my part, and not to toot Tim's horn, one of the things that's been, and Tim and I shipped 3 games together, and maybe someday we'll work together again, but, the great thing of working with Tim was always, he was willing to sit down and answer questions as I came at him from an algorithmic perspective, like, okay, well, what if the player does this, and what if the player does this? And I think that, one of the things that made us work together pretty well was, we could find a way to bridge that, I have these concerns for programming gap, and I think and his I have these questions for design gap. At the same time, you can also hear in what he's describing, he does the same thing with art and animation. It might be, what are the salient features that I need to convey about this character when you see him in his silhouette or whatever? And you know what? These are the most important things. I need to know these things from a gameplay perspective, and the rest of it, I just want it to be consistent with some sort of world that we're building. But I expect you to kind of go and figure that stuff out. Those are the sorts of things that come up. When it comes to programming, it's more trying to break things down into like questions that I can actually tell a machine how to answer. And so, regardless of what that particular programming language I'm using or whatever, ultimately the machine's kind of a pain in the neck because it only understands very unambiguous commands. So I need to figure out a way to take that, great example is like Jedi Starfighter. You remember our ongoing thing about the force powers there?
Maybe.
Okay, so at the beginning of Jedi Starfighter development, the idea was, we're going to have these force powers when you're in the ship, and Tim's idea was that it was going to kind of coalesce into like a visualization of what that effect would be.
Mm-hmm.
And we just, as programmers, could not come up with a reasonable and especially at that time performant way to make that actually happen. Like, we were like, well, what does that mean? Like, how does it look different for Force Lightning versus the shield or whatever? And ultimately, we came down to something that was more of a localized golf swing meter in 3D with these spheres and colors and things like that. Go play the game if you haven't and kind of see what I mean. But we tried to find a general purpose solution to, like, the player needs to know when this thing's going to be the most effective from a gameplay standpoint. It's going to do the most damage, or it's going to do the most protection around your ship, or slow time the most, or whatever. And we came up with a sort of general thing that we tried to pull out something that felt like an algorithm from design, and we were like, well, I don't know. If it's lightning versus the shield, those are very different. Like, how do we come to a thing the player can understand? And it was just a lot of conversation to get there. Not just with me. I mean, that was also with David Lee Swenson, who was the graphics programmer on Jedi Starfighter.
Yeah, there's a translation process there is maybe kind of another way to say what you're saying, too, is between disciplines, which I think... I'm not saying that we are the best at what we do or not. In fact, I think probably far from it. But I do think the best developers I've ever worked with are ones that look at things from all disciplines' perspectives. And I think the best games are coming from that, where you've seen a really good marriage of all the different disciplines coming together. And I think the last minor thing I'd mention is that we're big gamers. I think a lot of our opinions and about the games we're playing in this podcast come from just being gamers too. That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and definitely
you can see.
I appreciate we could talk about that for a long time. I shot you some feedback. This is feedback through iTunes, and you can shoot us that. We're aiming to get to 75 reviews, and after that we're going to send out some tchotchkes and one kind of main prize. So get those reviews in. I think we're around 42 or 43 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, we're getting there bit by bit.
Great.
And we're aiming for 75. That's the, like, hey, I'm going to send you something kind of threshold. But yeah, I'm going to give you the first one there.
Okay, so great podcast for fans of games by Shibby Train. Awesome name somehow. I've been going through the backlog of this podcast and really enjoy each and every episode. The guys go really in depth into what makes, quote unquote, makes a game, and I learn something or many things from each episode, even if I haven't personally played the game they're talking about. Highly recommend. Thank you, Shibby Train.
Yeah, thank you, Shibby Train, if that's your real name. Yeah, I mean, that's that's obviously what we aim to do. I have one from Peter_random numbers. Again, maybe not his real name. He says, great listen. Started out only listening to the podcast based on games or series I had played, but found the darn thing so insightful and enjoyable that I've ended up listening to the whole shebang. Yeah, one thing about that, I have lunch with a Bethesda producer friend of mine, Kevin Kauffman. He and I have lunch every couple of weeks, and he'll say, well, I was going to listen to the Fallout one, but I wanted to play along. And I'm like, dude, you don't have time.
Nobody does.
Nobody does. There are games we're not playing because we're playing these games, and that's fine, But if you've played them or just had an interest of them, there will be stuff for you. Yeah, there might be some spoilers, but let's be honest, nobody's going to play all the games. It's impossible. I'm not going to read all the books or see all the movies. So,
I'm not sure how we're doing it.
Yeah, I don't know how we're fitting in the time. There are times. Anyway,
yeah.
But yeah, listen along and share with a friend. Hey, I know you like these games, or I know you like some of the games these guys have played. Let people know. There's no reason to try to play along every episode. Great for those who can, but if you can't, no big deal. You'll get something from it. I hope you'll enjoy it. I shot you another one.
Okay, So Interesting is the title of that one, by Ben from Iowa.
I wonder where that guy lives.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll have to piece it out here. I listen to a lot of gaming podcasts. I found this thanks to Kotaku Splitscreen mentioning this podcast, talking about Final Fantasy IX, and I've been listening ever since. It's so refreshing to listen to industry devs talk about system constraints and how impressive certain aspects truly are. I don't have the time to play along, but it doesn't even matter. I'm looking forward to hearing about more technical innovations or the origins of things that are normal in gaming today. I've been playing games for almost 30 years, and I have forgotten some of the great advancements that took gaming from a niche, challenging hobby to interactive storytelling. Keep up the great work, guys. It would be interesting to hear about a licensed game that was good, maybe Aladdin or X-Men Legends, making a really good superhero game. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and actually, one of the things I did this past week, was to call out on Twitter and ask folks to send email with their feedback of games that might be interesting for us to tackle. And that was one of the things that I thought about, in the 90s, early aughts, what were the good, because that was a time when licensed games were a thing, almost a problem. EA famously was their whole model was licensing big titles, from Hollywood and making a kind of a cash-in game, really. Some more successful than others. I don't want to paint a broad brush.
It became a crutch, I think.
Yeah, it did to a certain degree, and it's always been a thing with sports games too. Obviously, and some license and some don't. And so that's a thing, and I don't know. It's something we'll have to think about going forward.
It's a good one, especially. Yeah, Aladdin's a good example. Lion King.
I heard that's really hard. Aren't those games really hard?
I think some of them are harder than others. Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that a couple of those are pretty tough. I don't know. I haven't played any. I haven't played a licensed title in a while. No, that's not true. I played Shadows of Mordor.
Well, the famous recent example for me are the Arkham games, right? Arkham Asylum.
Right, of course, yeah. The first one in particular.
Whew, yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's the last one. It says, informed critique and appreciation. This is from Mr. Sean 2K. 2K is, I don't know, is that Malaysian? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is. But anyway, he says, well worth listening to, even for games you've never played. An insider's point of view is always worth having. No better way to realize what you don't know, and that you don't know that you don't know it. The occasional feedback from actual developers of the game under scrutiny is fascinating. And yeah, that is, thank you, Mr. Sean 2K, if that's your real name. We do really, we in particular geek out to have our, conversations with developers. Over the last year, we had, starting from Ken Levine and really never looking back, a number of great conversations about games that we played. And that has been really illustrative to us and always, surprising in the particulars, I would say. Often it's like, of course, that's a total thing that just happens in development, is that, somebody's been working on a thing and it doesn't work out, and therefore you have a Tarrasque in your game, and you call it a Deathclaw. That's just the thing that happens.
You love that story.
I love that story. That's my favorite. That is so good. That's such a great detail. But yeah, we love talking with folks. Obviously we've been doing this a long time. We've met a lot of game developers and spent time with people both, that we've worked with, but also in other companies and at game developers conference and whatever. But yeah, we never tire of hearing the backstory, like how this came to be. And that's kind of one of the fun things when you move around in the industry to do, is to like get the history, like how did this thing happen, in this game that I love. So that's kind of yeah.
It's so crazy, and the medium is so crazy, and it changes every year. Every game you work on is so wacky and different from the last one. Like you'd think that we would have some normalcy sometimes, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So I feel like the stories are always going to be coming out. So
yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of the things that's interesting is that, because we're not a union industry. We don't have union jobs and a union that says this is what this job means and all those things. I think that those interesting topics bubble up from everywhere in the team in a way that they don't necessarily in film.
Yeah.
In film, they don't have, the gaffer talk about stuff on the, on the DVD and the bonus tracks or whatever. It's, even though that person probably has some interesting stories, there is, with unionization, there's sort of standardization. And, since we've never had that, it has almost never not been the Wild West in video games. Yeah. Even now. So
it's maddening because of it sometimes, though.
It is.
It burns people out. So
yeah, it's a total double-edged sword. I've had my own burnout, so I hear that. And I don't know, somebody here went and lived in the woods for a year, so can't figure.
Perhaps. Okay,
I think that brings us to the end of another fine episode of Dev Game Club. Next time we're going to play up through Aghanim, and we think that that's going to come in a reasonable order. We'll find out. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Brett_Duville and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
The podcast is at Dev Game Club and devgameclub@gmail.com. We look forward to having more reviews from you on iTunes. That's where I find them. But if you do send one to Google Play or something like that, let me know and tell me where to find it, and I will try to figure that out. But I do find them from all over the world, so thank you for those that come from overseas, week by week. I think that's what we've got for this time. Thanks so much. Good night.
Good night.
Hi, Dev Game Club listeners. It's Brett here. Just wanted to give you a little production note. This time I tried for the first time mixing in some adaptations or remixes of the music from OC Remix, notably one from Joshua Morse, that's the Overworld music, and one from someone named Freeze Tag with the Kakariko Village theme. If you like it, if you hate it, let us know at devgameclub@gmail.com, or throw us a tweet at DevGameClub. Talk to you later.